All right, so let's jump right in. Today we're tackling a really bold, provocative idea from the author Robert Wright. His argument? That core Buddhist principles aren't just ancient philosophy, but that they're actually a stunningly accurate roadmap to the human mind, and that modern science is finally proving it.
I mean, you know the feeling, right? We've all been there. You finally get that thing you've been chasing, the promotion, the new phone you just had to have, and for a little while, it feels amazing. But then, poof, the feeling just kind of evaporates, and you're right back on the hunt for the next thing. Sound familiar?
Well, here's the thing. That feeling, it isn't some new, modern problem. It's a fundamental part of being human. It's so universal, in fact, that ancient Buddhist wisdom has a name for this exact feeling, this happiness treadmill we all seem to be on.
And that word is dukkha. Now, you often see it translated as suffering, but that doesn't quite capture it. It's more like a constant, low-grade background hum of dissatisfaction, you know? That subtle, restless feeling that things aren't ever quite right, the very thing that keeps us striving.
And this is where Robert Wright and his book, Why Buddhism is True, really come into focus. He argues that if you want to understand your own mind, you have to start with dukkha. But, and this is crucial, he doesn't just leave it at philosophy. No, he connects this ancient concept to a very modern field, evolutionary psychology. And this is where it gets really interesting. He asks a powerful question. What if this constant feeling of dissatisfaction isn't a bug in our system? What if it's a feature?
And here's what might be the most liberating part of his whole argument. That endless cycle of wanting more, that hamster wheel, it is not a personal failure. It's not a moral failing. You're not doing anything wrong.
Instead, Wright says it's a direct product of our evolutionary wiring. See, natural selection, the engine of evolution, doesn't really care about our lasting happiness. It cares about survival and passing on our genes. And a brain that's always just a little bit hungry, a little dissatisfied, well, that's a brain that keeps pushing, striving, and ultimately surviving.
So let's just unpack that. Evolution's main goal for us isn't contentment, it's gene propagation. Just think about it for a second. An ancestor who was totally content might have just kicked back and enjoyed the sunset. But a restless, dissatisfied ancestor, they'd be out looking for more food, a better shelter, they'd be striving. That restlessness, that dukkha, is an evolutionary advantage. And what's just wild is how this very modern scientific view lines up almost perfectly with a diagnosis of the human condition from 2,500 years ago.
Okay, so if we're basically hardwired for dissatisfaction, are we just stuck? Is that it? Well, according to Wright, absolutely not. Because Buddhism doesn't just diagnose the problem. It offers a practical, hands-on tool to actually work with our minds.
And that tool is mindfulness meditation. But hold on. It's probably not what you think. This isn't about emptying your mind or trying to stop your thoughts. That's impossible. Instead, Wright frames it as becoming a scientist of your own mind. You get to just sit back and observe the mental machinery in action without getting tangled up in it.
The process itself sounds pretty simple. First, you just become aware of a thought or a feeling as it pops up. Then, and this is the absolute key, the hardest part, you just observe it. You don't judge it, you don't react to it, you just watch it. And over time, that simple act of watching starts to weaken the automatic chain reaction between a feeling and your response, breaking the cycle.
And hey, this isn't just some abstract theory. As Wright loves to point out, there is a mountain of scientific research that's starting to back this up. Study after study shows that a regular meditation practice can lead to real, tangible changes in your brain and your well-being. We're talking measurable stress reduction, a greater sense of well-being, and a serious boost in focus.
But, of course, with any big, bold idea like this, it's never quite that simple. Wright's book, not surprisingly, kicked off a huge and really important conversation. Is this neat and tidy scientific framing the whole truth?
So it's really important to see his book not as the final word, but as a catalyst. It's the start of a conversation. And a lot of scholars and lifelong Buddhist practitioners have jumped into that conversation with some really valid points that give us a much richer, more complete picture.
So let's look at the dialogue side by side. On one hand, you have Wright's perspective. Hey, these Buddhist ideas fit perfectly into a scientific framework. The critical view, though, says,
Whoa, hold on. When you do that, you risk oversimplifying a vast, deep spiritual tradition. Maybe you're stripping out some essential context. Then there's the focus on Western science, which critics point out can kind of ignore the centuries of diverse ways Buddhism has been interpreted all across Asia. And finally, that big claim that mindfulness can lead to the end of suffering, well, that itself is a huge debate. Many would argue that suffering is way too complex for any single practice to just eliminate.
So, where does that all leave us? You've got the core argument, the science behind it, and the critiques. Let's try to pull this all together and figure out what the real value is in this whole conversation.
Because at the end of the day, maybe the point isn't to use science to slap a true or false sticker on an ancient philosophy. Maybe the real value, the real magic, is in the dialogue itself. It's in seeing how this ancient tradition and modern science can both hold up a mirror to the human condition and show us something fascinating and new from their unique angle.
And that really brings us to the final thought I want to leave you with. Wright's book really forces us to ask a powerful question. If he's right, if we are fundamentally wired for dissatisfaction, what does that actually mean for our search for happiness? How does that change the way we live our lives? It's something to think about, for sure.